Show me the way to the next whiskey bar. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. Show me
ugly scenes, which I touched us quite deeply even before we discovered that Chris Whitty's father had been murdered on the streets of Athens by terrorists when Whitty himself was just 17 years old. If you haven't seen the footage, then forgive me, but you must have been living under a rock for the last few days. But I think the audio recording provides a fairly reliable picture of just how unpleasant this encounter was. Let me add that I wonder when I first started using the word yobbo with a straight face. We all turn into our parents in the end, don't we? But when the audio footage added to the information that one of the yobbos you're about to hear ended up holding the chief medical officer in something pretty close to a headlock while Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer, was doing everything he could calmly to extricate himself from both the headlock and the entire situation. So here is a flavour of what Lewis Hughes, aged 24, exposed the chief medical officer to as Whitty sought to make his way peaceably through a London park.
Please, sorry. One photo, please.
One photo, mate.
One photo.
I'm going to change that.
Leave the gentleman alone.
5 minutes after 11. The technical term, I believe, is absolutely mullered to describe the situation in which the young gentlemen involved in that harassment were. I mean, absolutely leathered. I don't know whether you think that's relevant or pertinent or not. The stupidest thing they did, of course, was film it. They filmed it themselves. Astonishing, really. Today's probably not the day for a conversation about selfie culture, but you never know. It may lead into that. But the decision not just to film it, but then to post the footage in pursuit of clicks and giggles, has seen one of the young men involved, Lewis Hughes, who hails from Romford in Essex, has told the Sun newspaper that he's lost his job as an estate agent after the incident. He's quite articulate, actually, and I only expressed surprise at that, not because he's from Romford, but because he sounded so inarticulate in the clip that I just played you. He's quite a timid, shy person, and I think that is why he didn't say, "Get off me." If he had said that and I had realised how he felt, I wouldn't have put my arm around him. He said he was hoping to get a selfie to show to his mum. As we discussed ourselves when we had this conversation, it was more that Chris Whitty was a bloke off the telly than anything else, although it has subsequently emerged that Hughes and his mate Jonathan Chu had, I think, been attending an anti-vaccine rally in in central London, which, for me at least, puts a slightly different complexion on proceedings, although there was nothing in what was filmed that spoke of particular animosity or unpleasantness being directed at Chris Whitty because of the job that he does. It was, as Lewis Hughes has attested, or it looked very much, as Lewis Hughes has attested, that he was simply seeking to get a picture of himself with a bloke off the telly to show to his mum. And Whitty himself, it's worth adding, has not commented publicly. He's understood to have dismissed it as a schoolboy behaviour, and he's told friends he wouldn't have told anyone about it if the footage hadn't already spread online. He's also, I believe, made it clear that he doesn't want any charges. He doesn't want to press charges against the individuals. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed that officers spoke to him after the incident, checked on his welfare, and they have revealed that he didn't want to make any allegations, press any charges, and he went on his way quite happily, which adds even further, I think, to the image of Chris Whitty as one of the good guys. Do you know he works every Christmas? I think he does shifts as a hospital doctor every Christmas. Doesn't have to, just does it because he's a top lad. To use another technical phrase. Absolutely mullered and top lad. We're really reaching for the thesaurus on the programme today. Police remain in contact, the statement continued, with the alleged victim. It's been recorded as common assault and continues to be investigated by the Met's Public Order Crime Team. So, inspired largely by Nick Ferrari's decision to have a phone-in about this morning, which I found riveting. A good old-fashioned ding-dong of a phone-in. Pick a side, defend it, and we'll see how the land lies at the end of it. I'm going to do exactly the same. Boris Johnson has called him a thug. So, clearly Boris Johnson considers this sort of behaviour to be much worse than lying to the Queen. And Lewis Hughes himself has said sorry and expressed that he would have stopped if he'd realised how uncomfortable he was making the Chief Medical Officer feel, but he didn't really realise how uncomfortable the Chief Medical Officer was feeling until he watched the video himself subsequently. And he's lost his job. So, what do you reckon? I mean, employment law could be quite interesting here. I heard a lawyer, again, talking on the Breakfast Show about potential thin ice. As I understand it, if you haven't been in the job for 2 years, you don't really have anything like the rights that you might once have enjoyed after just 1 year in the job. I think that was a change that came in under David Cameron, actually. I remember talking about it on the radio. So I don't know whether or not the legal case for getting rid of him will be challengeable. That'll depend, I think, on how long he'd been on the payroll. And I learned this morning that you don't have anything in your employment contract about reputational damage to the company that you work for. I do. It's about eight pages. You'll be delighted to hear I've just signed a new contract, and therefore I will be keeping you company every morning at 10 a.m. for the... Keith, mate, come on. Can someone get Keith a cup of tea? I'm sorry. I should have prepared you for that news, shouldn't I, privately, before dropping it like a bombshell in the middle of the programme. Poor old Keith. There's a lesson for you there, mate. Don't count your chickens before they've hatched. So I am, despite some very generous and tempting offers from elsewhere, I'm going absolutely nowhere for the foreseeable future, unless, you see... It's just perked up. Unless I do something that brings LBC or its parent company into what I think in legal terms is described as disrepute. So if I were to, I don't know, run naked around Leicester Square with a Ukraine flag poking out of my posterior, then there may be a case for arguing that I'd brought the business into disrepute, I brought the company into disrepute, and therefore they would be able to get rid of me without having to observe all the usual contractual terms and obligations that are in place. So I don't think that applies to a 24-year-old estate agent. I don't even know at this point, and I don't know that it would necessarily be fair to share it if I did know, the name of the estate agent that he worked for, but I do know that he's told the Sun he lost his job. His boss was uncomfortable with the idea of having him on the payroll after that footage went viral. Again, it only went viral because they posted it themselves. Again, they only undertook this behaviour because they were trying to get it. They were drunk and they saw a famous bloke and they behaved really badly towards him and clearly made him very, very uncomfortable. He describes it as schoolboy behaviour. So I think the question becomes, should this lad, this gentleman, should he have been sacked for what the victim of his misconduct has described as schoolboy behaviour? Or does Chris Whitty's opinion on the subject matter not a jot? When that footage went viral, it somehow became public property. What do you think? And I really urge you to bear in mind on this that you were drunk and 24 once. Quite possibly you were. You may not have been. But we change. I forget what the scientific explanation is. I prefer Shakespeare's 7 Ages of Man. I, at the age of 49 and a half, bear very, very little resemblance to the man I was when I was 40. Never mind when I was 30 or 24 or, God forbid, 15. I really mean that. And anyone who pretends otherwise is... Well, no, I can only say that about myself. Maybe you don't think you've changed at all in that intervening period. I've changed beyond my own recognition. So things I would have done when I was 24 and in my cups, or on one, as we used to say, were appalling. I'd be at the front of the queue of people to condemn and castigate what I consider to be hijinks in my teenage years, which I would now consider to be really antisocial and yobbish behaviour. Just for the record, I never hurt anybody or anything like that, but I behaved like a prat when I was plastered on a few occasions. So, does that matter? Does that matter? Just to be clear, when I read that he'd lost his job, I thought, good. serves him right. When I read his own account of what had happened, and crucially for me at least, when I heard Chris Whitty's description of the behaviour as schoolboy behaviour, I just began to wonder. So now we find out what you think. Drunken hijinks, which definitely constituted harassment, may have constituted some sort of, let me just double check what the Met is investigating, common assault. The incident has been recorded as a common assault. If he was on your payroll, would you sack him, and why? And if not, why not? Do you have any sympathy at all for him? 24 years old, drunk. I mean, the stupidest thing they did was post the footage, I think. That's even stupider. I hope you understand my logic here. It's even stupider than doing what they did, because they would never have heard of it. Chris Whitty wasn't going to tell anyone, but sticking it online was the stupidest thing they did. Do you have any sympathy at all for him? And should he have lost his job? You can come at that from any angle you want. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I don't think we're going to have a row on this one, because I don't think that I have a very pungent opinion. I am, as is increasingly the case I find on the programme at the moment, I'm 52% to 48%, the least controversial of ratios in living memory. I'm 52-48 that he should have lost his job. But I am always, as ever, open to persuasion. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. He's 24 years old. This will haunt him, if not forever, then for a very long time. He's been made unemployed and arguably unemployable in the short term by really stupid drunken behaviour. But 2 points here. It had a victim. He wasn't just, climbing over a fence he wasn't supposed to climb over, or shouting abuse at a TV camera. And alongside that, the victim seems to have moved on and doesn't seem to think that it was particularly egregious conduct. That phrase, schoolboy behaviour, may be part of your reasoning, maybe not. Right now, I think I'd be 50-50 if it wasn't for the schoolboy behaviour comment. Rachel is in Manchester. What do we reckon, Rachel? To sack or not to sack? That is the question.
Well, obviously he shouldn't have been sacked. People are just being hysterical. What do they want? Do they want to flog them in the street?
Well, no, we don't want to flog him in the streets. Don't go all tabloid on me on the first. Well, the question is, should we sack him? Not should we flog him in the streets? Do me a favour.
They need to give the heads a wobble. No, they shouldn't have been sacked. First of all, there's employment law to follow. There are a couple of, honestly, I dreaded seeing the video, because I thought it was some kind of trying to beat the guy up or something, right? I saw the video and I thought, really? Obviously, it was uncomfortable viewing, and it wasn't the right thing. They were wrong. They were drunk and trying to get a picture, same as guy for telly, blah, blah, blah. But they weren't being nasty. They were in hijinks, and they were just being silly. And, Chris Whitty himself,
Yeah, but they really... You've seen the footage, haven't you? You're not just going... Whitty looked deeply discombobulated.
Oh, he absolutely did, bless him. He did. But even he, the person it's happened to, is an intelligent man and is reasoned enough to say, he's actually said they'll probably grow up to be fine-standing citizens. He said that. Because they probably will. Goodness me, they've had a few drinks and they've been a bit silly because they've seen a famous person. Let's get over it. Let's just be real here. And that employer is ridiculous. Yeah, just because it's all in the media and everything, and you're worried about your reputation. No, call the guy in, give him a warning, talk to him about behaviour and how it reflects on your company, whatever. That's fine. You just don't go sacking people, just for public opinion. It's beyond.
Okay, a strident point, well made. I kind of still sit probably 52-48 on this one. But what about looking at it from the client's point of view? If you were being shown around a house by that bloke and you recognised him, that arguably is doing, and you recognise him and thought, I don't want to be on my own in a house with this bloke.
Well, that's just being ridiculous.
Why is it being ridiculous?
Well, if someone has, show me any 20-odd-year-old young person who has had a few too many drinks, including the person being shown round. It's just ridiculous. I mean, for God's sake, who's standing moral authority on everything? Jeez, God, he's had a few drinks.
Get off the fence, will you, Rachel, and say what you think. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. The voice of Manchester. Thank you, Rachel. Speaking of Manchester, I'm there on Sunday. I'm doing an appearance, a book festival appearance at Homeland. I think there are some tickets left. I'll retweet the link. But if you want to get down there in Tony Wilson Place, I'd be delighted to see you. 20 after 11 is the time. Paul, hey, this is a bit bit of a coincidence. Paul is in Manchester. Did I mention that I'm in Manchester on Sunday doing a gig, Paul?
Yeah, got any free tickets?
Fantastic. Right, steady on, mate. What did you ring in to say?
I'm an employment lawyer. You asked about the employment law implications of what's happened?
Yes.
You're right about 2 years. That's for unfair dismissal. You have to have 2 years service before.
So if he hasn't been on the payroll for 2 years, then he hasn't got elected. I mean, he hasn't got any recourse to the law on this occasion.
You can bring any other claim. There are other claims you can bring, discrimination, whistleblowing, etc. But it looks fairly clear-cut that if he's following this, he's been sacked because of the incident. So yes, 2 years.
And what do you think? I mean, leaving the law aside, which is probably quite difficult for you to do, the question of if it was your estate agency, would you have fired him?
Yes, I would. And I think that although it's not entirely clear-cut what the law is on this area, because the ACAS code even says you can be charged with a criminal offence and still work for your employer. There's some guidance on that in the ACAS code. But in this situation, question you would ask is, can he continue to carry out his work in this workplace, given the reputation issues with the customers? What's the relevance of the conduct to the workplace? He has committed a criminal offence. He's committed a criminal offence of common assault, at least, if not a public order offence. And you've got to think about the customer base. I think you've just mentioned people being shown viewings of houses by someone who's just therefore attacked perhaps one of the most important people in our society. But
is that relevant? Would that be that wouldn't be relevant in court, would it? It would be an attack upon anyone. It wouldn't the status or I mean, you tell me. Here I am laying down the law to a lawyer. Would it matter? I mean, does the identity of the person, the victim of your conduct, influence the gravity of the conduct?
Absolutely, because it goes to the reputational issue. The reputational issue of someone.
Of course. So if you'd given James O'Brien a bit of a wobble in St James's Park, then your boss might give you a pay rise. But it's Chris Whitty, it's the chief medical officer, and therefore it speaks of a much bigger problem, a much bigger issue. So you're selling
your house. You've got a choice of 15 estate agents, and you pick the one where the viewer has just attacked the chief medical officer at the height of the pandemic.
Yes, I hear you. And the 24-year-old's boys will be boys defence?
He can run it, and he might get away with it, because these questions are questions of fact for an employment tribunal. When it gets down to it, 95% of these cases are decided on a question of fact. Was it fair and reasonable in all the circumstances? Now, once you've got a test like that, the range of possible opinion is out there. Having said that, on these facts, I think it points fairly clearly in one direction.
Nicely put. What do I owe you?
Tickets for your gig.
Give your details to Eleanor if you're serious. I'll see what I can do. If you're not serious, don't, because they probably won't be any left by the time the doors are thrown open. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. Lawman is in Harrow. Lawman, what would you like to say?
So I used to...
Is that lawman as in, like, being a sheriff? You are a lawman, or is that your actual name?
No, it's actually a pseudonym.
It's a pseudonym. So, okay, you are the lawman. Lawman the lawman, online too. What do you want to say?
We could say that. So I used to work for a corporate, a major estate agent, corporate company for about 15 years. So I put myself up to quite a senior level. So I obviously used to do the hiring and stuff. If it was a member of my staff who done this, I would definitely sack. I mean, we had it in the contract that anything that would bring disrepute to the company, it's a reputation. You're tarnishing the reputation of the company that you work for. I mean, you know, you're going to people's houses asking to trust you with the biggest asset they have. You know, they don't think that, you know, what sort of people are you employing? Can I trust these people with, you know, what we have? So definitely we would sack.
Yeah, so it's specific to the industry and the individual for you, rather than a sort of broader question of rights and wrongs.
Sorry, so it's absolutely to do with public dealing. If it was someone working in an office environment, things would be very different, because you're not meeting with the public. It's not a certain reputation that you have to uphold.
Yeah, I think that works for me, actually. I tried to make that point to Rachel earlier, but I didn't make it as well as you did, and that idea of it would actually, it doesn't matter whether you behaved similarly or badly yourself when you were 24. That idea of turning up to have a look around a new house and thinking, aren't you the fella that kind of assaulted the chief medical officer in the middle of a global pandemic? Do you know what? I think I might like someone else to show me around this gaff, if that's all right with you. I don't think that's controversial. All right, 55-45. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. 55 sack, 45 don't sack. Dan's in Wakefield. Dan, what do you reckon?
I think he's not really done himself any favours, realistically.
You're not going to win any prizes for that, Dan, are you, mate?
Well, the thing is, in the type of job that he's in, he's got to be self-aware of his image, especially to the public. So, as much as you can't straight up fire a person that easily without there being, like, legal ramifications for his employer, they are definitely going to try and see if he's been above board in his workplace and go, right, can we fire this person for some reason? Especially when he's not going to make us look good. And if we don't fire him, we're definitely going to get some slack from the public if they can find out where he works.
I mean, not to make light of anything, but the footage of him on the lam in St James's Park and the photograph of him in the office all suited and booted with his spectacles on and his hair slicked back, I don't know that many people would have automatically recognised him or possibly ever recognised him. So I don't know if that's a defence or a counter to the point that many callers are making, particularly you and the last fella, the lawman. But
I can't say I'd want to defend him myself, really.
No.
It's horrible to see, and I can't really go with his apology of, oh, well, he didn't tell me that not to do that, when he was visibly trying to get him off his arm.
Yeah, but he wasn't looking at Chris Whitty, he was looking at the camera, and also he was off his nut on booze.
That might be kind of personal to me, that as much as, okay, you can have a bit to drink and you start not realising things, but I still feel like even when you're drunk, you still have personal responsibility, and it was his responsibility at the end of the day. He knows that's Chris Whitty. Don't really be... You've got to have a certain amount of your brain going, do I do that, or do I maybe... If I'm thinking of that, maybe there's a part of me that's thinking I'm allowed to do that.
And we don't know whether they were still in their cups when they decided to post the footage. So there could perhaps have been time to, act in haste and then repent at leisure. But sticking that footage up suggests that they probably weren't too concerned about Chris Whitty's feelings, having seen the discomfort that was clear in his response. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. James, it's the selfie generation. I've seen you in Chiswick for many years, and I have never disturbed you for a selfie because that is your private life and time. These days, with the selfies and followers, things are crazy. He should have been sacked for disrespect. Georgia, please feel free next time, if you really want one. I'd be absolutely delighted to pose with you. You know, there are a couple of lads who came down for the game earlier this week, who were waiting outside. I forgot to ask their names. I was so taken aback. They were waiting outside the studio when I turned up for work the morning after the match. I presume they'd stayed in a hotel nearby. They hadn't made a special journey into town in the hope of saying hello. But that was such a lovely way to start the day. So I'm supremely relaxed about stuff like that, Georgia. Although I'm not Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer. And I wouldn't have been supremely relaxed about being on the receiving end of the sort of behaviour that he was. Here's the question. If it was you... There you go. Let's throw this into the mix, because there's a broad consensus emerging that he probably should have got his marching orders. If it was you that happened to, so remember the footage, right? You felt like Chris Whitty felt. You read the room, so to speak. It wasn't, for example, akin to the kind of harassment that I got at one of the second referendum marches, when the real shove the phone in your face in the hope of getting a reaction and say provocative and unpleasant things in the hope of me reacting angrily or lashing out, and then you film it and you put it on YouTube and you make 50p. It's not like that. It's awful, and I'd hate it to happen to me, but it's not what you might call a targeted attack. If it happened to you in precisely the way that it happened to Chris Whitty, would you want the culprit to lose his job? And I wonder, honestly, whether your answer to that question will be different. Remember Paul the lawyer saying that is not actually a very good question, because the reputational damage suffered by the company is contingent upon the status of the chief medical officer. But just to turn the telescope the other way round, as it were, to flip the question, if it was you, would you be calling for blood? Would you be calling for this lad's head on a silver platter, professionally speaking? Because I'm not sure you would, actually, even if you think he should have been sacked for harassing Chris Whitty. phone lines are open, although they're quite busy. If you're quick and patient, you should get through before 12. And then, of course, it's mystery hour, when you probably won't. To go or not to go. And I think this puts a different complexion on things. If it was me, and specific to the way Chris Whitty was treated by these men, I don't think I would want them to lose their job. I don't think I would. It's easy to say, but... You know, it's a sort of, well, hey, give us a selfie, and unacceptable behaviour. But it's not, I hate you, Chris Whitty, I mean, that's not to minimise what he went through in this episode, but he's been exposed to much worse abuse, at least verbally. I just don't think, I mean, Chris Whitty, I don't think, would want Lewis Hughes to lose his job. He's got infamy, hasn't he? Infamy. They've all got infamy. We know the man's name now, and we know his name for thuggish and unpleasant behaviour. But if it was you, would you really want the person concerned to be fired? I don't know whether it's relevant, but I'll add, at this point in the economic cycle, at this point in the pandemic recovery, I'm not sure you would, even if you think he should be fired for harassing Chris Whitty. I think that's a sustainable position. I don't think it's contradictory, because you're not Chris Whitty, and neither am I. And at this time, I feel the country should be throwing a protective ring around people like the chief medical officer. He gets abuse in the strangest of places, national newspapers, men and women who really should know better. But I don't know. I still don't know. Chris is in Tottenham. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hi. So I've got a few butterflies, so excuse me if I'm just going to be garbling a lot of words really quickly.
There's no one listening, mate. The figures are a myth. Honestly, it's all fake news. It's just me and Keith.
Yeah. Right. So, hi, Keith. So he shouldn't be sacked. Now, this boils down to a lot of fundamental systematic issues that we have. Now, if this was described as yobbish hooliganism kind of behaviour, now, what you've got to look at is, before pre-COVID, you know, taking the train, if you're happen to be on the Jubilee line or Met line and you just happen to pass through Wembley and there's a massive game of football going on, if you're riding in that train with all the football fans, you're going to hear some hooliganism at its best. You're going to hear roaring, you're going to hear chanting. People on that train that are not there for the football match are going to feel uncomfortable. Some of them, and, I've seen it, being on the train, some of them are being, like, not groped, but, sort of, like, just jumped on, like, passengers, that just, caught the eye badly of one of the fans, and it's nothing's made of that.
But you're not defending... Well, it would be if it was filmed, and if it was Chris Whitty...
Well, this is the thing. Now, do we cross the line because it's Chris Whitty? Or
well, I would quite like. I don't know if you're defending them, Chris, but I mean the behaviours you've just described, I would quite like to see people punished for.
I'm glad you said that, because that brings me to the next point.
Oh, blimey! So this is good.
Let's look at Matt Hancock. Yeah. Now, these two chaps...
Do we absolutely have to? I've been looking at him all week, mate, and it's not a pretty picture, is it? But go on then, you can have your moment.
It's just part of the furniture now, isn't it? It's one of them old cabinets that you got in the corner, and you're like, oh, God, I need to get rid of you on Spock or something. But anyway, so what I'm saying is, look at Matt Hancock. This guy, right, and I like to say, and I do believe that a majority of the population, if not most of the population, will back him on this. He has blood on his hands. Now, he's there saying to people, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And obviously, he's gone against everything. I mean, last year with, the lockdown, and obviously now with that lady, and, all these breaking the rules. And you've got to look at, well, hold on a minute. You've been sacked. You've done your repercussions. What you've done is...
Well, he wasn't sacked, actually. He resigned. The Prime Minister didn't want to sack him, refused to sack him, and subsequently lied about sacking him, as far as we can tell.
We need to look at Boris now as well.
Well, steady on. You're making me... I mean, you're covering an awful lot of ground here. I'm going to steer you back. Actually, what I thought was a zinger, but as is often the case when I think I've happened upon a zinger, it may not turn out to be a zinger at all. If it was you, would you want him fired? If you'd been harassed like that in the park?
No.
Told you it wasn't a zinger.
He hasn't attacked me. He's drunk. He's clearly intoxicated.
Yes.
What he has to do, I'll tell you what we can do. Because if he's fired, he's going to be unemployable,
Probably,
and that's going to come back to the system.
Yeah.
The system's going to have to fund him. So get him to do community service. Don't fire him. And
then you'd have to prosecute him. So, final question: if you turned up to have a look around a new house, and he was there on the doorstep jangling the keys, how would you respond?
let me answer that question by telling you this thing.
Go on.
Remember what happened with the Trump administration?
I thought you had
when they brought the
butterflies,
Four
Chris. You're
Seasons-
like a flipping natural, man. You're bringing Trump
mate.
into it now. You've been doing it all your life.
Yeah, but hear me out, James.
Go on.
The Trump administration, they booked the Four Seasons landscaping. Look at the much of publicity and business they've accumulated because of that error. Yep. And this is...
But it wasn't an employee of the Four Seasons Landscaping who made an idiot of himself. It was Rudy Giuliani. That doesn't work at all as a parallel.
It doesn't matter. It's the same thing.
So you're doing the no publicity is bad publicity line of argument.
It's not bad. Any publicity is good publicity.
Rubbish.
That's how I see it.
It's not, though. Trust me.
Well, obviously, yeah, you're right. But I mean, what I'm trying to say is that chap. Yeah, if I'm going to go look at a house, I'll be like, hold on a minute. Were you that guy that was in the limelight? I'm not going to say he assaulted Chris Whitty, because unfortunately, this has been taken out of context, and you've got the high people calling before me and saying, he should be sacked as in the terms and conditions of the contract. Well, hold on a minute. He's intoxicated. Okay, he's 24 years old.
Yes.
All right. He's learnt from the mistake.
I don't disagree with much of what you're saying. I really don't. And yet, it seems to me that the fact that it's Chris Whitty is the game changer here. You're looking at it from the wrong end of the telescope. You're focusing upon the culprit. I think the identity, the more I have this conversation, the more I think that the identity of the victim is the key.
We're supposed to be inclusive. We're supposed to treat everyone the same.
No, we're not.
It doesn't matter what ranking you are, because there's a hierarchy now. So you're saying those with a hierarchy
we're
should
not,
be
though, are you?
differently.
If you treat a police officer in a certain way, it's a different proposition from how you treat a radio presenter. Go on.
I'll tell you what.
Go on.
You got the hooliganism, you got the loudest behaviour, the football crowd, or other people just, congregating in some of the rough areas of Tottenham or other parts of the borough. They give more abuse to the police officers than those two chaps to Chris Whitty, and they just get say, listen.
No, but that's operational. That's because it would be impossible to feel all of their collars if there's 500 of them and only 50. Old Bill, but I know you make some brilliant points. I look forward to it. Did you enjoy that? Have the butterflies gone?
Yeah, now I'm sort of...
He's off now, isn't he?
Really quickly.
Come on!
My heart's pacing really quickly now. I've got so much more to say, obviously, with the vaccinations and everything.
Well, bring me again, all right? We're probably going to talk about similar and related issues. We'll certainly be talking about some of the politicians that you mentioned, and good Lord, it shows how fast the world turns, doesn't it? I'd completely forgotten about that Four Seasons story. And in fact, news from America is, of course, criminal charges expected to be brought today against Donald Trump's business empire, and still the Republican Party is full of people pretending to believe his continuing lie. It's so odd, isn't it, when you look at the warnings you issued a few years ago about the B word and what would happen if the liars and cheats responsible for winning that referendum were left unchallenged. What would they go on to be in charge of next? Whew. And the same with Trump. If you allow this so-called narrative of fake news and alternative facts to go unchecked, where will it lead? Answer to an attack upon the national legislature, incited by the president and undertaken by people hoping to hang the vice president. But I guess maybe this is how the really bad stuff always happens, because most of us just sit there rubbing our eyes when really we should be reacting in an altogether different fashion. That's why this conversation is quite enjoyable, in a way. Not in any way making light of it. What happened to Chris Whitty was awful. I still think he should have been sacked, despite Chris's best efforts. And I think that estate agent deserved the sack because it was Chris Whitty. I don't know whether that's a legally sound position, but it's an honest one from me. Chris, thank you. We'll talk again. Cora is in Harrow. Cora, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello, Cora.
So I personally believe that he definitely should have been given a sack. That was the right decision.
Why?
For all the many reasons your other callers have already mentioned.
Yes.
Just in terms of, the reputation of the organisation, the fact that you could see that he was distressed. The fact that it is COVID.
You can see that he was distressed, but I can also tell you that he is reported to have described it as schoolboy behaviour and said that he wouldn't have told anyone or complained if the footage hadn't already spread online.
I mean, perhaps this is coming from my viewpoint, working with victims of domestic and sexual violence. I can sort of understand, wanting things to go away. And I think especially because of the public profile that he has, and because we somehow managed to generate controversy around public health measures.
Yeah. That's not Lewis Hughes' fault, though.
He didn't have to post it. He didn't have to do any of it.
No, of course he didn't have to do any of it, but none of us ever had to do any of the things that we look back on with an air of regret, did we? It doesn't mean we deserve to be fired for them.
No, but I don't think you'll learn anything if we just all say, well, boys will be boys, which, by the way, is a phrase that needs to die.
No, can I apologise now for you? Well, I was merely representing a position held by people who are much sillier than you and me, Cora. I would never use that position myself. I was merely the messenger, ergo you really shouldn't shoot me.
No, fair enough. And also, if you look at, like, Lee Hurst and what he ended up saying...
Yeah.
You know, that's the kind of thing it spawns. He does have a big profile.
This is a suggestion from a former comedian that the treatment of Chris Whitty didn't go far enough somehow, for which he was, I think, temporarily suspended from Twitter. Do you know, I was mates with Lee Hurst once. Well, he probably wouldn't want me to say that, given that we now attract very different followings. I had no inkling whatsoever of what may have been lurking underneath the surface. I always found him to be utterly charming and very kind, and I'm happy to say that out loud, because his behaviour recently has been the polar opposite of those things. Absolute polar opposite. Funny old world, isn't it, Cora?
It's been incredible, and I think we do have to really sort of put that effort in there to protect these people.
Okay, well, I mean, it is moving. The pendulum is moving in terms of the tally. It's Nick started. I should have borrowed his team sheet, shouldn't I? His score sheet, see where the score was. If it's swung back again. But I guess my own position is probably hardening as well, and rightly or wrongly, it's because Chris Whitty deserves even more protection than other citizens do, given the current climate, his job and context. Excellent point just made by my colleague Shivani, which is that Chris Whitty probably wouldn't want us to be talking about this, given that he wouldn't have told anyone about the incident if the footage hadn't already spread online. He's reported to have described it as schoolboy behaviour, and he has, I think it's fair to say, in the midst of a global pandemic, which he has had huge responsibility for tackling, rather more important fish to fry. He doesn't want to press charges. He was spoken to by officers and did not want to make any allegations, and then he went on his way. And that's a quote from the Metropolitan Police statement. So sorry, Professor Whitty. I know that might sound a little bit glib. It's too late to turn the clock back now, but maybe we shouldn't have talked about this at all, given that the victim of the behaviour that we're discussing, in an admittedly very enlivening fashion, would probably rather that we didn't talk about it at all. So 9 minutes left, with apologies to Professor Chris Whitty. Should this 24-year-old estate agent, have lost his job for drunkenly accosting the chief medical officer in a London park, and then either he or one of his pals put the footage online. And it is a drunken accosting rather than an unpleasant targeting. It was an anti-vax march, I believe, that these fellas were leaving. So, I mean, that's unfortunate, to say the very least, that they've swallowed that particular canard. However, that wasn't part of the encounter with the chief medical officer. They weren't accusing him of bad behaviour. They weren't doing the sort of shouted equivalent of some of the ludicrous banners that have polluted the streets of London in recent months. So there we go. Hannah's in Hull. Hannah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How's it going?
Pretty good, actually, Hannah. I've enjoyed this conversation right up until the point my colleague, whose job is to kind of boost me up and make sure I'm feeling happy and really bouncy in the studio, has just pointed out that we probably shouldn't have been having the conversation at all. But you crack on.
Okay, thanks. I think it being Chris Whitty is the important factor here, in that the guys on the camera seem like sort of alpha males, and I don't think they do that to maybe a sports personality or a film star or something. And Chris Whitty comes across as maybe a bit of a geek and, you know, a bit of a shy guy. They do that to women. I could categorically say that they would do that to women. And so, as a woman, I'm not sympathetic to the fact that they've been sacked, really, because I think it goes to their personality, and that they would pick on someone that they would consider inferior, but maybe not someone who doesn't. And also with Chris Whitty's comments, he seems like the sort of guy that would be like, "No, it's fine, don't worry about it." You know, I think with someone else, they might say, "It was disgraceful and I was really uncomfortable and that should never happen." And now this guy, hopefully, will learn a lesson that he wouldn't have before. Like, it's been put in the limelight, so to speak, and he's got to answer for those actions. And it's not okay. It's not boys will be boys. it's not okay to do that, whoever it is, Chris Whitty or just like a lone female in the park, something like that.
Yes. That was something that emerged when we first had this conversation earlier in the week. The fact that it's the kind of conduct that women endure on an almost constant basis. And that leads, and therefore any attempt to sort of caution or corral people behaving like this is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's...
Okay.
I can understand why
several
some men would say, like, yeah, it's fine. I wouldn't mind it if they did it to me, or I wouldn't want them sacked. But women have to face this all the time, and it's become news because a guy has had to face it, and actually this sort of behaviour should be trampled on, should be stopped.
And it's a reminder of how outrageous this sort of behaviour is. Which we don't get often enough.
Scary sometimes.
Yeah, well, not just sometimes. I imagine it's scary all of the time. It's three men in their cups coming after one single unaccompanied woman would be terrifying. But one of the lessons I've learned over the last 5 to 10 years is that it is so commonplace that women don't tell us about it, and we get taken by surprise when things like the Me Too movement emerges. Delphine is in Brighton. It's like the greatest hits today, Delphine. You haven't called me for a while. What have I done wrong? Did I do something to offend you?
I was laying low after the snowball incident.
This one for the archives. What do you think about this one?
Oh my gosh, it conflicted me a little bit, this one, James.
Me too. No, me too. And still actually a bit conflicted, although possibly less than I was at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with some of the things that your previous caller said, actually, because when I heard about this and obviously saw the clip, I was horrified for two things. And the caller before, the lady that works with victims that have been abused, was that when I look at Chris's behaviour when the person has him in a headlock, he is scared, and quite rightly so, because I think drunk people are scary because they're unpredictable. You don't know what they're going to do next. So post-event, Chris Whitty's saying, oh yeah, don't worry about it, because he came away relatively unscathed. But whilst it was happening, he didn't know where it was going to go, and I think that's something that...
that's a good point. No, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, as females, you have that vulnerability with people like that. But the reason why I believe he should be sacked is, I don't know if you remember, but back in the mid-'80s, there was a very high-profile murder case of a female estate agent called Susie Lampew.
Yes.
And that really affected a lot of people.
It continues to do so.
Myself included, as I went about my work. I was like, oh my God. So it made women really scared. And organisations also were fearful because they realised they had to put an extra element of training in place for new starters in terms of their personal safety, because I was, training for financial advice, how people receive phone calls from the public, how you vet them, and all these things were put in place. So when I first heard about the incident and saw the video, I just thought, oh gosh, that's bad. That's a real poor show of judgment. But then when I learned he's an estate agent, I was horrified because, as people have already mentioned, that industry has a certain element of vulnerability about it, because you're going into, as somebody mentions, the biggest asset most people own, but also a personal space that you're not familiar with. So I could be going to view that property. He turns up, and what his employers now don't know about him is, or now know about him is, he has poor judgments.
Yes.
Because not only did he accost somebody, and the person is clearly distressed, and I think you mentioned earlier, well, he wasn't looking at Chris, he was looking at the camera. When you're looking at the camera to a certain extent, you can see what's being shown on the camera. So he would have seen that distress reflected back at him, as well as his own face. But still, he persisted. So if he were to take a pretty young girl around a house, and then he touched her arm and she recoils, does he spot that signal? Or does he continue to advance towards her?
Blimey.
The employer can't take that risk, because if something happens to a customer and she...
So you've turned it around, as you so often do, Delphine. Well, no, I mean that, because you're not looking at it from the reputational damage to the estate agent's office. You're looking at it as an insight into the poor judgment of the employee that he has publicly displayed and indeed advertised. And that is why you can't take the risk of putting him in to coin a horribly modern phrase, a customer-facing role.
No, you can't. Because also what he did was...
I think that could be the clincher. That could be the clincher, Delphine. I think you've only gone and blown the bloody doors off.
I love that phrase. That's one of my favourite movies.
Me too. Although I don't think the editor of The Sun has seen it, because they've got Harry Kane on the front cover today. done up like Michael Caine and saying that we need to do an Italian job against Ukraine in Rome at the weekend. It's almost as if they don't know how the film ends.
It's
isn't
very
it?
embarrassing.
We're going to do an Italian job on Ukraine, which means that we're going to reach full time, teetering on the edge of a cliff with a few tons of gold bullion at one end of the bus and all of the robbers at the other. Delphine, as ever, you cover a lot of ground in fantastic fashion. I think that might be the point. So the sacking is not about the damage done to the reputation of the company or the opinions of the employer. It's the insight into the judgment of the individual, in this case a 24-year-old estate agent, that is provided by the footage. Tony's going to try to swing it back again. You've got 60 seconds, Tony. Make it sing.
Oh, I was going to go and swing it back, but listening to your caller from Brighton, I'm reminded that he's committed a Section 5 public order offence, common assault, drunk and disorderly, 3 offences he could quite easily have been charged with. His judgment has been very poor.
So you were going to say he shouldn't be sacked, and Delphine's just done you.
Yeah, I think so. And as well,
told you James, she was good.
Maybe you could go with a final written warning, but no, I think when I was 24, would I have done that? No, I think in the back of his drunk mind, he's seen that Chris Whitty looks, no disrespect, looks like a soft touch, and he's done it. Would you have done that to Roy Keane?
Or even Jonathan Van Tam, actually? I mean, to make an even more pertinent parallel, I don't think anyone would do that to Roy Keane. No. I don't think that... I'm trying to think of an example of someone really. I don't think Tyson Fury would do that to Roy Keane, mate. No. He says you'd have to take your life in your hand. The best thing, did you see the bit where Roy Keane was talking about, what was he talking about? Conversations. He's talking about the 3 lads that got COVID suspensions. Did you see this? The two Scottish players and the English players. And he said, I don't understand why they were talking to each other for 15 minutes in the tunnel. He said, I'd never talked to anyone for more than 2 minutes. I just thought that was about as Roy Keane as it's possible for anyone to get. Thank you, Tony. I love that. Tony's point was undone when he was on hold by Delphine, who was making the call.